What is the best way to tell if you are doing too much volume for a muscle group? Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I thought I would chat with you guys and gals a little bit about this today. But a quick reminder, if you guys will please click like down below, it would be greatly appreciated. If you're not following or subscribed, please do so. And why don't you tell me how many sets you are doing per muscle group underneath in the comments? I would appreciate that. Thank you. All right, so let's get over into the topic. Essentially, guys, if you are not seeing any progressive overload or not getting quality sets, our volumes are too high. But how do we determine quality sets? All right, what we have to remember, and I've covered this a lot, recruiting the fastest twitch muscle fibers is where almost all of your muscle growth occurs. Okay, your intermediate fibers just don't grow that much or at all as you start to get more and more advanced. They grow a lot early on. And then the different fiber types, as you go up the chain of 20 or so subtypes you have, they grow less and less and less till when we get to just like your fast twitch fibers, which comprises a pretty small number. Those are the ones that keep growing indefinitely, right? They don't really have a growth cap. But again, so when people need to understand why they get diminished returns every year, it's just like, man, I make less and less gains every year. It's because of that, right? Because you have fewer muscle fibers that are capable of growing. And if you're not recruiting the muscle fibers that are capable of growing, those sets are just not productive. So what you need to remember is all your slowest twitch fibers, they're great. Like they can go for hours and hours. Okay, that's why you can walk. Most of you get out there, unless you're really out of shape, you could get out and walk for 2 or 3 hours straight, right? If you had to, you could go walk and you would be able to do it, all right? That's all endurance fibers. That's really the only muscle fibers involved in that. And because of that, they can go over and over. When we get up to those fast twitch fibers, they're only going to be usable a number of times. They're only going to recruit, half a dozen times or so in a given period of time. And then they need several minutes sometimes to recruit again. Okay, you see where I'm about to go with this? And when they get too fatigued, they just stop firing. So what you will find is they will not keep going. So you can't just do endless sets. And usually, and this isn't a hard and fast number, this is where people came up with the effective rep theory, is that about the last 5 reps before muscle failure, on if you're fresh, and it could be more. This has not been directly studied. There's not a lot of real evidence towards this. It just works off of kind of what we know about those fastest twitch fibers. They're only going to be recruit maybe about 5 total contractions in a work set. And then they need time to recover. All right, they always get used on the 1 rep max for anything 90% or above. But otherwise, you got to be real close to failure. Well, if you're doing sets and people say, well, but if I hit failure on 20 sets in a row, that I reached them every time, it's like, well, no. If those breaks are too short, you didn't use them again. So the best way to look at it is how many reps are you using? And it needs to be versus fresh. Like if you know that on a dumbbell curl with a given weight, let's say fresh, you could do 18 clean full range of motion on that dumbbell curl. When you get down to about 13 reps, it's useless. In other words, if you start doing a set with it that's about 12 reps, 13 reps, you're more than 5 reps from failure, even if you fail. Now, this is what confuses people. They're like, but I reached muscle failure, so I got to those fibers again. Well, no, they never got recruited. Okay? That's why you only got those. Your intermediate fibers do all your reps up until we get closer to failure. So for the most part, the idea behind this is, let's say your 10 rep max. Okay, your 10 rep max, it probably is only hitting those muscle fibers around, say rep 6, 5 rep, 6, 7, somewhere in that range. Those muscle fibers are getting fully turned on. The first few reps are warm-up reps. This is again the theory behind it, and I think it's a good rule of thumb to use for your training, though. All right, but that counts for all your lifts. That counts for all your muscle groups. Every muscle that it gets, every lift that uses that muscle. So what ends up happening there If you can't get within 5 reps of your fresh sets, you're probably doing junk volume at that point. And I'm not saying it's 100% and there's no possible growth, but we're getting pretty close to useless. Now you're just possibly beating up recovery, all right? And you're not recruiting those fibers again. So the volume is probably too high. Now, here's the thing to think about with that. You need longer breaks between. Okay, so when you see people who do these really long workouts, they may still be getting growth if they're able to take long enough breaks to sustain performance. All right, but we get to a point with that volume where if your breaks are so short that you're not, in other words, let's say you've done a bunch of chest work, you've done a flat bench, incline, dips, and then you get over to your cable flies or something, and you're only able to do 11 reps with a weight you could have done 20 fresh, you're probably not getting anything out of that movement. You're probably into junk volume at that point, unless you start taking more time between. Okay? But then we get into the point of, man, how many hours are you going to come in and work your chest? And then we're going to get over into that topic of, are you able to even recover from that later after the workout? And I think these are the factors that people need to think about is, are you going to be able to recover later? This is one reason certain people like to do certain higher frequency setups, and this is why some people promote that. That's why the old school guys before drugs kind of trained that way, so that every muscle got hit up to 3 times a week, but then they didn't always do as much volume. But if they did, they spaced it out through the workout, right? They might have another exercise between their pull-ups and their rows to give it a little bit more time so that they're fresh again. But keep in mind, if you are not able to sustain performance on your exercises through a workout, the volume is just too high, right? That performance needs to be sustained, and that performance is relative to when you are fresh, okay? Relative to when you're fresh. So either you're doing too much volume or your work density is too high. You're trying to do too much with too short of breaks if you're not able to sustain performance. And if that happens, it's just turning into junk work. You're not necessarily getting quality sets. You're probably not growing from that additional work. But you can also assess that workout to workout plotted over time of, are you able to sustain performance over the weeks also. So that's the stuff that you really need to look at and think about, right? Are your sets truly high quality, or are they just fatiguing sets that are low quality?